Oh, good evening. Welcome to the Agile Project Management class. I'm waiting for the statistics to show to see how many of you are on. It's just about 6 o'clock. It'll just save me the trouble. Turn this off so I don't get the feedback. And we'll get started in a moment. Let's put my slides together. And Leslie, good to see you. Hope everything is on the mend and you're feeling better from that terrible malady that you unfortunately had to suffer through. See the names. So as everybody's gathering on, I'm just gonna take a peek at the attendance sheet. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I hope that everybody received my email. And on the email, there was a couple of things. One was the link to get onto here. So if obviously if you didn't get the email, you would not be hearing my voice right now or seeing my face, because you wouldn't have the link. Okay. Hello. So a lot of familiar names. I'm going to see if we could do something to actually see each other during this class. I know in the past classes that we've done, it's been kind of one direction, that I've been the only face and voice that you would hear, and we'd communicate through the chat, right? And we'll continue to do that, but I'm going to make it a little more interactive, a little with this class, because it's a smaller group. It'll be easier for me to actually man the controls, so to speak, and ensure that everybody is, not stepping on each other, trying to talk over each other. That can get to be chaotic. But we might find that there's a good use to have some interaction that way, and we'll give it a try today. Agile project management. First thing, some housekeeping stuff. Like I said, if you didn't get the email, you probably wouldn't be here. If you're not here, you're not hearing my voice, you don't know what I'm saying. But if you're not here, I'll probably be just checking my email in another window to see if anybody is out there trying to break in. Kind of a routine for the 3 weeks. We have the 3 weeks class this Thursday, next week, and June 4th, 3 weeks in a row. The attendance document. So on that email that I sent out, it had the link to get into tonight's class, and then there was another link to a project folder, right? A project folder on a Google Drive, and in that project folder is 4 files. Okay, in that project folder is 4 files. The first file that we're going to talk about is the attendance, right? So on the attendance sheet, you should be able to go in there and mark yourself in as present, and in the column verified, right? So verified means that you've been able to get into the YouTube, see my face, hear my voice, access the class, right? Participate in the online chat function, right? And access the Google Drive, right? That second link, access the Google Drive, where those 4 files that we're talking about is there. So if you were able to actually do that, please just go in and verify as such, right? The reason I did that in advance was that if anybody was having trouble, it's hard for me to troubleshoot while I'm teaching a class, right? So I can't put this aside and start working on one person. So um, make sure that you set up in advance that or your technology is in line. Don't wait until class time to say, "Oops, I don't have a password. Oops, the link doesn't work." Right? Do that in advance of the class so that I can actually be of assistance to you. Right? The other thing is mark yourself in as present when you get in, so that I have the attendance records that I can pass along to the school when the course is over. Anybody that has perfect attendance 3 weeks in a row will get a course completion certificate from the college. Okay, they will be mailed to you. I know some of you, I think most of you have been in my prior classes. I think we've all met and seen each other in face-to-face classes. Most of you. Some of you have been in my other online classes, the previous online classes, so we really haven't met yet. But in the face-to-face classes at the college, I would be given the certificates for that final class, and you would leave with one in hand on your final class. That's not going to happen online, right? So online, they're going to mail you the certificate, probably, I'd say within 2 weeks of course completion, maybe sooner, depending upon how the administration is working. They're working from home. They're not 100% active due to the restrictions. I submit my attendance records the Friday morning after this course completes, right? So Friday morning, June 5th, I'm going to submit, and then it's up to them. So you may get them in a week, you may get them in 2 weeks, but they're very nice certificates. So sign in, do your attendance. Now, in the previous classes came up was that since these classes are available as a recording, right? I don't encourage it because we do have this ability to participate. You do have the ability to ask questions. But if something should happen that precludes you from either attending a class or missing a large portion of the class when it's live and live streaming, go back and you could watch the class on the historical records, right? You can come to this link. This link will be out there indefinitely with this class. Once the class is over, you will have access to it in its entirety. Okay, so if you do that and let me know, I can go in and mark you present for the class, so you won't lose any. You won't lose your course completion if you do that. Okay. So please mark yourself in. I'm just looking. Jeanette and Dorit. Jeanette and Dorit are the only two that have not signed in yet. So maybe you're not on yet. I don't see any welcomes from you. So maybe you're not on yet. Maybe you're coming. I'll send out a reminder later to Jeanette and Dorit to sign in. So Yanuchka, electronic version in the meantime today. Oh, so they sent an email. Did they? Let me know. Did they just send it to you? Was you asked for it, or did they send it to the entire class? They emailed it and then to the entire class, and then mail it. I'm assuming that the real certificate, the paper certificate, is in the mail. That would be good information for me to have, because it looks like the summer classes are going to be in this fashion also. So I have another 2 classes that are going in July and August. Okay, so Mariam, you should not have received anything because we're talking about a prior class. We're talking about a class that you took 2 years ago. I'm trying to think back. I do remember you. I'm thinking back. Oh, okay. So what they're doing, I wish they would tell me. It'd be nice for me to have this information firsthand. So I guess what they're doing is they're sending you a temporary, and then the final certificate will come when they get back to the office. Okay, great. So now I understand what their process is. Okay, I see Dorrit is on. So I think the only one we might be missing is Jeanette. So the only one that we're missing is Jeanette. We'll check with we'll check back with her later. Great. I guess so. Yeah. So that's what I'm assuming is that they just emailed out the certificates to everybody that was on the attendance list as having completed the class, and in some time you'll receive a paper copy, but I guess that's not important that you have that. So if you are going, for your certification exam, that's your proof of completion for those number of hours. So tonight is Agile Project Management. We talk about project management. I think most, if not all of you, have taken my full project management class. And in that class, we do talk a little bit about Agile, what it means, and we'll review and kind of cross-reference on that information tonight before we move into a deeper dive of what Agile project management really means, how to leverage it, how to structure it using what we call Scrum, using Scrum. And you'll learn about Scrum, and this particular class leads to another professional certification called the PSM, Professional Scrum Master, that you can apply for and test outside of this class. Okay, so here's something that I'll mention it now. We'll probably come back to it again because I know that that most of you are probably interested in the professional certifications. They are valuable in today's job market, and with what's going on now, who knows what the job market is going to look like, but credentials are always going to have their place in the job search, in your marketability, and in your differentiation from other candidates, right? And like what I like to say is the credential will get you in the door. Will get you the interview, perhaps, right? That, along with everything else that your experience, your education, etc., right? A 3-day class in Agile and a credential certification isn't going to be the golden ticket to that plum job that you're looking for. But along with everything else, along with who you are, along with your education, your background, your experience, right? It will substantiate a lot about you. It'll put you on a level playing field that says, well, standardized. Not only have they worked in their particular company doing a particular function, having certain roles and responsibilities, but have proven themselves to have a level of standardized information that's cross-industry, cross-functional, and is not so specialized that it doesn't fit outside of their environment. So the credentials are going to go a long way, and I hesitate to predict what post-COVID economy and post-COVID job market and post-COVID chaos is going to look like. But in any event, this is a positive. This is all positive. Those of you who, and I'm saying this because I know, I think 2 or maybe 3 of you that are on in this class have already certified for PMP and or CAPM. Okay, I know Mariam that you certified for PMP. I know Isabel and Diana have both certified as CAPM through PMI for what I'll call traditional straight project management. Some of the rest of the class just completed a class or has taken a class in the past and hasn't certified for that yet. And now you're looking at Agile, and now you're looking at potentially going for your PSM, Professional Scrum Master. How do these two things fit? Well, the information that you learn here is going to have some degree of overlap with traditional project management, but it's very, very concise. Okay, and that's why this is a 3-day class, and the other is a seven-part class, because there's just so much more breadth in the full project management. Okay, here we're going to be very pointed about what Agile is and putting a structure around it so that you can implement a project in an Agile framework. All the other stuff, risk management, communications, resource management, we're not going to cover that here, right? We might only cover it as it applies to the Agile and to the Scrum framework, but that's all stuff that you will have learned previously, okay? So with this being very concise and pointed in that framework of Agile, what I typically recommend is to take your PSM certification almost immediately after completing these 3 weeks. Meaning, here we will complete our class in 3 weeks. It's June 4th. Yeah, take a few days to a week to review, to study, to self-test, do practice tests, assessments, evaluations, to see how you stand, and drive your readiness up very quickly and sit for the test within, like I said, within a week. You should be able to do it. You should be able to do it. And that's been my experience with students that I've been teaching this for, several years now. I think 3 or 4 years I've been doing the Agile. So keep that in mind. The CAPM, if you remember, I did not say that. CAPM exam, I said, okay, now that we finish the class, now you hunker down and do about a month's worth of study, a month's worth of practice tests, etc. Right? So if you're sitting there and saying, well, what do I do now? Because now I have this Agile, I have the Scrum, I have the CAPM. I'm telling you, do the Scrum first. Get it out of the way. Do it quickly. You'll be able to do it within a few days after completion of this class. Then go back to your CAPM. Go back and do your practice tests. Go back and read your PMBOK. Go back and prepare for a more grueling test. Okay? And we'll go through what this certification credential is all about in a minute. But I'm gonna leave it there. I'm just gonna go back. If you hear me talking sometimes, I have to. I'm managing the studio, what it's called, to do the class. So you seeing my face and managing my screen share. I have to actually go back into this document, right, in order to scroll through it. So when I start sharing the screen with you, I will not see your activity because I'll be staring at my PowerPoint slides. Okay? So I do have to kind of navigate myself back and forth in order to see if there's any call for attention there. Okay. So with that, is what I will do. I'll leave my face up in the small box. We'll bring up SlideShare and go through at least the first couple of pages, the high level stuff for this particular class, Agile Project Management, with today's date. Syllabus and agenda. Here's my name and email. You should all have that already. Like I said, you all must have received my email, or else you wouldn't have the link to be attending right now. So anytime you need if you have any questions that come up offline, any questions about the material, any questions about the course, any questions about anything that I said upon, maybe you're thinking about it after the class, or any questions about the credential and the certification test and whatnot, just send me an email. My response might be, well, we're going to get to that next week, or you know what, I can make sure it does happen next week, or I can answer you in the email, or both. But I will be responsive. Hey, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Right? I'm still in lockdown, so I'm pretty responsive with the emails, and I just love to help you. The class itself is an introduction to the fundamentals of Agile project management. So we're gonna work our way up from the basis through putting together what we call the Scrum framework. The Scrum framework is a type of Agile project management. Okay, it's the most popular flavor of Agile project management. Agile project management can mean several different things. I'd say probably most of you, if not all of you, have bought the PMBOK for the previous class, right? For the CAPM project management class. And probably when you purchased the PMBOK, it came with the second book, a thinner book for Agile project management. That book is pretty much a high level. If you go through it, you'll see some of the other flavors. I'm not going to go into the other flavors. There are things called XP programming, Lean, Kanban. Some of that stuff, as it pertains to Agile, it's good to know what it is, and that information you can get by reading that book. If you don't have the book, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal, because we're going to go through the Agile approach and focus on the Scrum framework, because again, that's the most popular, and the role of the Scrum Master. So you learn about all of the roles within Scrum, but we're going to focus our attention on that of the role of the Scrum Master. So that will put you in a position for that credential as well. There are no prerequisites, right? You may have taken a prior class with me. You may not have. Doesn't matter. We're going to introduce all the material at the introductory level, and work from there. So if you have, there might be some things that, like I say, cross-reference each other. There might be some carryover. There may be some things that we learned at a certain level in the project management class, and now it's going to drill down into more detail. But nonetheless, this class will stand on its own as a class unto itself. Okay. Attendance, as you all know, there's no grading. This is continuing education. You will not be receiving an A, a B, a C. You will not be receiving a numerical grade. In the final class, we are going to have an assessment test, and it's only for you. You'll see what grade you get, but it's only for your purposes of preparing, for the credential, and it's for your purposes in assessing how much you actually retained from the class. But if I don't look for the grade, I won't find it. I won't see it. I can go out to the database and look you up and see what the score is. But I typically don't do that unless we have a discussion and we want to talk about some of the answers, some of the questions that you may have gotten wrong, or you ask, why did I, do so poorly? Or, I could help you with that, but I typically don't go in looking for your grades because the grades are not important. The assessment is for you to give you an understanding of how much of the material that we teach over the 3-day class is actually understood and retained. And the certificate, I'm going to now assume, since that's the de facto assumption, that you will be emailed a certificate upon completion of this class, and when the continuing ed administration goes back to work, that they will be mailing out hard copies to your home address. The class meetings this week, next week, the 28th. Final class is June 4th from 6 to 10 p.m. 10 p.m. is a stretch, especially in this format, right? Especially in the online. My guess is there's not going to be as much conversation, as much interaction, even if we do have some degree of interactivity and questions through the chat. My feeling has been that these classes have condensed down a bit. So we'll probably be ending in a shorter class time than 10 p.m. And our agenda, what are we going to cover? Well, tonight we're going to cover 1 and 2. Right? Tonight's class, May 21st, first class, we're going to cover Agile Project Management, kind of an overview, what it is not. And then dive into the Scrum framework and explain the roles, events, and artifacts that form the Scrum framework. Okay, so you'll get a lot of foundational material tonight. Next week, we're going to actually go through the Agile life cycle using the Scrum framework. So we will step through kind of, a day in the life or a cycle in the life of a Scrum project, going through from one event to the next through the entire process, and perhaps circling back to a second iteration. Our fourth and final week, we'll talk about the Scrum Master Assessment. That's that short little test that we'll do. That'll serve as a review for the class. But before we get to that, we also talk about exceptions and what happens if type of things. What happens during the life cycle if everything isn't going your way and you need to take accepted action, right? So we'll be going into that on the fourth week. Some exceptions, some planning, some high level planning aspects of Agile, not in the day-to-day grind of the life cycle. And then we'll also talk about how to apply, pay for, and prepare to pass your Scrum Master certification. So class materials, the Scrum Guide. It's found in 2 places. One place, you can go to something called www.scrum.org and navigate your way through that, and you'll be able to find a free download. I think they call it the resource tab or resource menu item, and you could download the Scrum Guide from scrum.org. If you want to save yourself some trouble, I do recommend that you go to scrum.org eventually. But if you want to save yourself some trouble now, I've downloaded it already, and it's on the Google Drive. The Scrum Guide is out there, and that's the most current Scrum Guide from 2017. It's short. I'd like you to read it between this week and next week. It's probably around, I'd say, give or take 15 pages in total. Okay. I think you should take that, download it, and between now and next week you should read the Scrum Guide. It'll put a lot of things into perspective that we're covering in class, and it'll make you think about what we do next week a little bit as well. Okay. Some folks have asked. I'm just going to scroll out to my view. And some folks have asked about any type of supplementary books. And I think I recommended it to Isabel. There's a book out there called The Quick Start Guide. Some books that get into Scrum get really technical, get really overly engineering oriented. And the Quick Start Guide is written in a nice, easy to digest language. Perfect as either a complementary to this. If you signed up for this class and you had no idea of what Agile meant, but you had nothing better to do on Thursday nights during quarantine, so here we are. You figured maybe I could learn something. The Quick Start Guide is good. So you know what I'm going to do is, while we're just here, I'm going to share the screen with you. I'm going to bring it up on Amazon. Bear with me for a second. So I'm doing this real time. So there it is. It's on Amazon. It's called the Scrum Quick Start Guide, the Simplified Beginner's Guide to Scrum, Scrum Master, Scrum Agile. Yeah. And it's relatively inexpensive if you're comfortable with a Kindle, an ebook. It's only $5. Paperback, you'll spend $12.99. Like I said, it's really an accessible, easy to read introduction to what we're doing in this class. Okay. I just want to point out. I think I put the link into the email as well, so that could be helpful. And it's completely optional. It's completely optional. If you're interested. There's not going to be any great secrets in this book that we're not going to cover in class, and it's not mandatory. I'm not going to give assignments from the book or anything like that. But like I said, if you're interested, that's a recommendation. Okay, for an optional book. And Isabel seemed to like it. Oh, do you know if I could take the test online? Absolutely. And in fact, the PSM, that is the only way you could take the test online. The Professional Scrum Master, the test is 100% online. You take it in your home, in the comforts of on your computer, on your laptop, right? It's a 1 hour exam, 1 hour time limit, 85 questions. 80 or 85. I'll get to that in a second. But yes, you take the test online in the comforts of your home. And I have to go back to my share screen again. Because that actually has some of the information that you're asking about, right? So it is online. It's a $150 fee, and that's per attempt, right? If you fail, you got to take it over. You pay another $150. So what does that mean? It means before you sit down and take the test, prepare yourself so that you're going to pass first. You know, $150 is light compared to some of the other certifications, but you don't want to waste your money. Right? Be prepared. 80 questions, multiple choice, multiple answer, and true and false. What does that mean? Multiple choice. Select 1 out of 4. 1 answer is going to be correct. 3 answers are going to be incorrect. Multiple answer means select 2. It might give you a list of 5 answers, and you have to select 2 that apply, or select 3 that apply. They've been doing that on the CAPM and PMP recently. Okay, so that seems it's a more difficult question because you may only know 1 out of the 3 answers. You do not get partial credit for. And the Professional Scrum Master, the PSM certification, does have a true and false. So that makes it a little easier. Even if you don't know the answer, it's a 50-50. Flip the coin, right? So that makes it a little bit easier to compensate for the difficulty of the multiple answer questions. But here's the tough part. 60-minute time limit, passing grade is an 85. Okay, passing grade is an 85. So do the math. You can only get a few wrong, right? So 80 questions. You have to get 68. You can only get 12 questions wrong, right? In 60 minutes, taking 80 questions is, right, less than, without doing the math, it's less than 1 question per minute. So you got to move, right? You got to move, and you've got to, score fairly highly on it. It is an open book test. Okay, so unlike the options for taking the CAPM and now the PMP at home, right? The PSM does not have a proctor. They feel that by putting the time limit on you, there's only a certain extent that you can go and look up the answers. And if you're looking up everything, you are not going to complete the test, right? So you have to know it to keep up with the pace. But if you don't know something or if you have really good notes and you have your Scrum guide and you have highlights and you have index cards and you might have whatever you have at your disposal, you can utilize that. And one of the things I like about that, one of the things I really like about it is it's fitting for the role of a project manager. Okay, if you think about it, the role of the project manager, the value of the project manager is not what they've committed to memory. It's how resourceful you can be. It's going to the right place at the right time to find the right answer. Okay, and doing it efficiently with speed. Right. So this test kind of plays into that role. I mean, some of the things that you have to do for PMP and CAPM is committing to memory. It's not open book. It's all from memory. You can't have any study aids open while you take that particular test. So that turns project management into a memorization. Some people have good memory, some people don't, right? So memorization is not going to make you a better project manager. And I won't argue that memorization is a gift, and if you have that gift, utilize it, right? It's something that I think it's something that people are born with. Some people are wired for memorization, some people aren't. Use it if you have it. But as far as being effective in a project management role, being effective in a Scrum Master role, it's your experience, your fortitude, and your ability to be resourceful and find the right answer at the right time. So in a lot of ways, that this format plays nicely into testing you just for that. The certification is lifelong, does not expire or require renewal. Take the test once, you're a PSM. They have 3 levels of PSM. Most people only go for the first level. I think the second and third level is if you're going to be involved with Scrum.org as a trainer. I think that in the terms of numbers, there's several 100,000 PSMs worldwide, and there's probably less than 2,000 or 3,000 in total worldwide with the second and third level. There are other professional certifications that you may want to consider. I don't gear this class towards them. And in fact, the Scrum Alliance, which has been around the longest, actually Scrum.org, splintered from the Scrum Alliance because of some of their certification policies. They call it the CSM, Certified Scrum Master. And you cannot obtain this credential without attending their proprietary, mandatory 2-day training class, which is upwards of $1,200 plus, depending upon what area of the country it's in. And I don't even know if they're doing anything online now. I don't know what their business model is anymore. But the certification is tied to your training with the organization. They do have an online test, a multiple choice, 60 minutes to do 35 questions, and the passing grade is 69%. The certification expires every 2 years, and it requires a $250 renewal fee. Every 2 years, you got to pay that fee to keep your CSM active. Okay. I bring this up because I actually obtained this way back when. It was either before or just as Scrum.org was forming, and the training and the testing was paid for by my employer at the time. So I am technically a CSM as well as PSM. The certification expires every 2 years. I have a little confusion about that because when I took the exam, it didn't expire. And I believe they grandfathered anybody that had passed the certification before they put that rule in. So I think technically I'm still an active CSM, although I really don't know for sure. But now they want a revenue stream, so $250 renewal fee every 2 years to keep your CSM active. PMI, the people that bring you CAPM and PMP, they have something called an Agile Certified Practitioner, ACP. It's a $495 exam fee taken at a testing facility similar to the PMP and CAPM tests. I believe that in response to the pandemic, that they have brought this this exam online as well. Okay, it's 120 question multiple choice in 3 hours. It does span the full gamut of Agile and not just Scrum, right? So we'll go into some of the other frameworks. And just as the PMP and the CAPM do not publish a passing grade, right? So everybody asks me, what's the passing grade for CAPM? And I say, I can't tell you. It's based on sound psychometric analysis, right? What does that mean? It means that some tests are harder than others, and they take that into consideration. They try to keep a certain passing percentage of people that take the test, so the test doesn't become too easy. They try to keep an elite status to it. So they don't publish a passing grade, so you don't know what your target is. Okay, and that same thing is true for CAPM and PMP. What I tell everybody when you're preparing for those tests, so you might be hearing this and thinking about, oh, I'm going for CAPM. What am I shooting for? I thought I was shooting for a passing grade. Well, I always say that if you're getting an 80 or above on your practice exams consistently, then you are prepared to take the real test, the actual exam. Okay, so in preparation, the number becomes meaningful, and I use an 80%. Why 80%? It might be 75, it might be 70, but you don't want to just barely pass. You want to have that leeway. The same way I say for your PSM, which is 85% passing, I say take the test until you're scoring 90%, 92, 95 on a consistent basis on the practice exam, right? Because if you're just getting 85 on the nose in your practice, you're kind of taking the flip of a coin. 85 can turn to 84, and I've had students and I know people that have failed with one question below, like getting an 84 or an 83, whatever the percentage comes out to, 83.5 on the exam, and fail and have to take it over, right? So get yourself to the point that you're getting well above the 85% for the PSM. If you're thinking about your CAPMs or your PMPs, think in terms of well over 80% consistently. Not that you did it once and it was a fluke, right? Consistently take a couple of practice tests and see, okay, I got 85, I got 87, I got 92, I got 96, I got 88, right? So you consistently, beating the mark. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about what Agile project management is, what it isn't, how to use it, when it's helpful, and when not to use it, when it doesn't make sense, right? We always want to know when the right time to use a tool is, right? If you have a toolbox, right, and you just bought a brand new hammer, right? You got your toolbox, you got your screwdrivers, you got your wrenches, you got your saws, you got tape measures, you got all your tools in your toolbox, and you just got this brand new hammer. You put the hammer in your toolbox. It's shiny metal, chrome steel, and you go on the job, and you just can't wait to use this hammer. Right? You just can't wait to use it because it's new and you're excited. It's all that. You can't use it for everything. If you have to cut wood, you're not going to use the hammer. If you have to, remove screws, you're not going to use the hammer. If you're looking to tighten bolts, you're not going to use the hammer. But now you have a use for a hammer. Now you take it out. So same thing with Agile. Same thing with Scrum. Understanding what it is and when to use it is very important. So Agile refers to an incremental method of managing technology projects. Right? We talk about technology projects because technology projects is how Agile and Scrum were first introduced. They were developed specifically for software development, technology integration. But over time, it's found usefulness in other applications as well. It supports the adaptive, change-driven project life cycles. What does that mean? What's adaptive, change-driven project life cycle? Well, it differentiates ourselves from a traditional approach. The traditional approach is what's known as a predictive or plan-driven life cycle. sometimes known as the waterfall model. Okay? And what does that mean? The traditional project management plan is developed upfront. So we know what we're building, what our end result is, what's in scope, what's not in scope, who's going to do what, when it's going to be done, and we cast out an elaborate plan to take us from day 0 to day end, right? And all the days in between. Then we manage to that plan. So now project execution, right? We manage to that plan so that on certain dates, we can expect certain people to be producing certain output. It's predictive and plan driven because the planning is all done up front. It's all done up front so that it's predictable. Agile says anything beyond tomorrow is a guess at best. There are too many factors at play in what our end result is going to be. There's too many factors in play as far as technology changes. There are too many factors in play as far as customer needs. There are too many factors in play as far as our own corporate strategy and where we want to be relative to the marketplace. To plan a project for 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years down the road. Okay. So agile is just that. We want to be agile. We want to be nimble. We want to be adaptive to changing environments, changing business drivers, changing customer needs, changing business strategies. Okay. I'm going to just kind of pause for a second there and thinking of that. What types of projects, either that you've been exposed to or that you can think of, have fit that either one of those models that you could say, well, you know, we did it on an agile, or it should be done on an agile, or maybe agile would have been better because by the time we were done, we had something that nobody wanted because we weren't adaptive. We didn't keep up with customer desires. Okay. So like I said, I am going to put a link out on the chat. So I just put a link out onto the chat. Okay. Came through my business name, Silkwind Studio. That's me. If you click on that link, right, it will take you to the broadcast studio, and I could let you in, and you could actually talk. You can converse. I could share the screen with you, and you could maybe something other than chat. I'd really like to see if we can get some volunteers for that. A new website launch. Yeah. right? So that could be done either way, right, Sarah? You could have a new website launch that says, well, you know what, it's really new. We don't know what the response to it is going to be until it gets out there. So why don't we just put a basic framework of some functionality out there without investing too much, and then see what the response to it is. See how our customers are responding to it. See how the marketplace is responding to that website. See what might be lacking. See what our competitors might be doing, and then add other features to it afterwards, right? Rather than saying, well, this is all that we want on the website. We're going to have function A, function B, function C. We're going to build it, and we're not going to release the website until we're done, right? We're going to work on all of these things because they're all in the plan. And when the website is complete, then we'll deploy it and it'll become available. And then you'll have features out there that nobody ever uses, right? You'll have features out there that that might function in a certain way that that the customers wish they might have worked differently, right? So yeah, and it could go either way. Was if you're very clear about what the website is going to look like and it's very predictable, then there's nothing wrong with launching a new website using a predictive, plan-driven, traditional project management approach. There's no reason to use Agile if the website is very simple, straightforward, and there's no question surrounding it. So yeah, it could go either way. Production of product and sales inventory as well as income stream per product sales. Tell me. So is that an example for Agile, or is that an example for Agile? That looks to be pretty predictable. Unless you could explain to me why this would be Agile, I would just reading this production of product and sales inventory as well as income stream per product seems like something that's going to be pretty well predictable, right? You're looking at your inventory, you're looking at your income stream based on a known quantity. What would, and I'll throw it back, if you want this for Agile, what would Agile maybe gain for you? What would the ability to be Agile and do things in quicker timeframes with less functionality? What would that do for you? Sure. So waterfall is that predictive plan driven. They're all synonymous, right? So waterfall is planning upfront and then executing according to the plan. Yanuchka, it's exactly what we did in the CAPM project management class. Okay, that we're doing a traditional project management approach. No takers on the classroom. I feel very lonely. I feel very lonely. I was hoping, especially Leslie, especially with something like that, I think that would be more easily spoken than typed. So during the course of the class, if you go into this link, if you enter the classroom on this link, you'll be put in the background. You won't come immediately up. You won't just pop up onto the screen. I have to let you in. So if I'm elsewhere, if I'm doing something, if I'm in teaching mode, I'll let you hang out there until an appropriate time, and then I'll click you in, and then we can cover any type of question that way. Okay? So just going to put this back out there again. Okay, I'm just going to put this back out there again. If you want to come into the room, you want to come into the room, you can. And I'll let you in at the appropriate time. Oh, yeah. It's pretty okay, so everybody's on different devices. If you're on a laptop, it works really good. If you're on just like on a standard laptop or a computer, works pretty good. If you're doing this on a phone or if you're doing this on an iPad, I don't know. It's really device dependent. But I've used this before. It pretty much works. Oh, okay. So I see what you're saying. So assessing the metrics, defining whether or not the product will be useful and need an upgrade. So as part of your agile process, you're defining metrics, and now you're getting into a lot of what we cover in lean methodologies and Six Sigma is to define what's going to be your your metrics in terms of what your next steps are going to be. So that'll determine what direction you're going to go for useful features or upgrades. That's exactly it. Now I understand exactly what you're thinking. Nan?
Hi, do you hear me?
I hear you, but I can't see you.
Oh dear. Okay. Hi.
Now I see you.
So I'm still at work, but
Nan?
do you hear me?
Hi, do you hear me?
I hear you, but I can't see you.
Oh dear.
I'm getting feedback, so I have to mute myself.
I'm still at work, but
Nan?
do you hear me?
Hi, do you hear me?
I hear you, but I can't see you.
Oh
I'm
dear.
getting feedback, so I have to mute myself.
I'm still at work, but
Nan?
okay.
Do you hear me? Hi, do you hear me?
I think
hear
it's
you, but I
me.
can't see you.
Oh
I'm
dear.
getting feedback, so I have to mute myself.
I'm still. Do you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to say that, like, where I work at, we have, for example, new ventures that we want to maybe, like, I work in a laboratory, so, and I work in a toxicology laboratory, so we want to open up a new sector of our business. And when we first start out our plan, because we're working on a plan right now, when we first started our plan, we decided to look at certain potential candidates or clients that we wanted to work with. And we're building this whole model. We're getting everything set up for it. As we move a little bit further towards, getting our license to be able to do that kind of testing, before we really go live, we actually have to go back to them to see if the interest is there, to see if we can get those clients, to see if what we've put together was meeting their need. And it has to happen somewhere along the process. So we can't just go full steam ahead and say, okay, we talked to you initially, this is what you said, and let too much time pass by without checking back in with them to make sure that from our initial conversation that they actually are still interested in the product that we're offering. So it's a constant change with regards to the initial plan that we had. And we've had to do it in our current business, where now, we're about 6 years later. We saw that we had initial clients. We thought that, we're going to work on something, work on a product for them. And when we went live with it, we realized they weren't particularly interested, some of the ones that we had spoken to. So we have to get that feedback going over and over again.
Okay, so I just muted you, Nan. That's an excellent description of a use for Agile, right? Because you have some idea of what you need to do, and now you're looking at in terms of a value statement of what's important to your customers, not only what was important to them at one point in time, but now again, what's important to you today, right? So the time between initial discovery and analysis and now ready to go, there's so many factors at play that um, may alter or reprioritize what's important, and that needs to be considered. So the same way you're doing that to get initially started, Agile will take that approach on an ongoing basis. So the next round, so you determine what the feature set is, or what the important value driven um, result needs to be now, and then later it becomes um, another iteration of going back and regrouping and saying, okay, what do we do next? Well, you might think, well, after we do this round of value driven requirements um, for our customer group as we understand it to be, then we'll do something else, right? With Agile, you don't worry about and then. You get to and then at that time, and then put that together to see what those, again, value driven requirements would be at that point in time. It could be a month later, right? It could be 6 weeks later. Okay. That was excellent. And I didn't really skip you. So this is actually a very, very good thought, right? So thinking of the Jacob Javits Center, we talked a little bit about this in our previous class. It was timely and fitting. The change of venue to adapt to the pandemic, can that fit into Agile? So yes, right? Because well, we have to learn a little bit more about what Agile is. But Agile says, well, we're going to do what's important to us now, and that might not have all of the features, all of the capabilities, but it's going to suit a need as quickly as possible, and then whatever's important to us then we'll deal with, right? Our last class, our project management class, we even looked at ventilators, right? That was the important thing. We were talking about manufacturing ventilators because the projections were so high, and it looked as though we were not going to have enough ventilators to keep people alive because of the trajectory of the virus. Right? What it turned out to be is we were overstocked. Well, we became overstocked with ventilators because the numbers did not reach what we needed it to be. So if we were to produce, 100,000 ventilators based on a projection, maybe we would say we want to produce, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, and then we'll see if we need to produce more, right? So yes, Agile can fit into the Javits Center example. It could fit into the ventilator situation. Talking about a temporary need. Yeah, well, temporary need can go either way. If you know something is temporary, right? If you know something is going to be a temporary need, and you could prioritize what you need for that temporary base, you can go either way. One, plan driven, predictive, or agile. Either one can satisfy that, right? But when it's a temporary condition that's going to have a what's next, that's when agile is most useful. Okay. So good examples, good discussion. Let's get back to the slides and learn a little bit more about what Agile is and what Scrum might be. Okay, so Scrum is one of several Agile frameworks. Basically, it puts a structure so that you can implement an agile approach. It's the most widely used. It's I don't know if it's the oldest or not, but it's the most time tested as far as usability, and it's very, very common. And we say it focuses on people over the process. What does that mean? Well, this slide might look familiar to you. Here's our predictive cycle, and here's our adaptive cycle. Rather than waiting for the end to have a result, an output, a deliverable, you're going to have incremental deliverables. So you have something that's useful, but it might only be a small piece of work, a small result, but it's usable, it's useful. So if we're talking about the Javits Center, maybe this first one is set up for non-ventilator patients. And then here we could add ventilated and intubated patients. Okay, that we could first get it set up, that the facility is clean, it's safe, it's staffed, it's ready to accept, but it doesn't have the capabilities of the medical equipment, right? And at this point, maybe the second increment says, okay, building upon the first one, we can have the intubation, right? Because we found that that is important. And then the third one might be that we can handle both COVID and non-COVID patients together in the same facility. Okay, maybe at this point that the protocols haven't been put into place to distinguish between the two, so it was limited to just COVID patients. And at this point, we could accept all patients, right? Because all of the procedures are there. You start out with the small one, right? Now you see, at this point, is it valuable to go to this deliverable, or is there something else that we didn't even consider in our initial planning that is important now? Let's, talking about the COVID, talking about the pandemic, let's just suppose, right, things were different. And we get to the place here, and we allow COVID patients in that don't need intubation into the Javits Center. And all of a sudden, instead of the intubation, instead of the need for ventilators, we see that there's a rise in these in the juvenile virus that's affecting the heart. There's something new that's been coming up, resulting in some death among children. The name is escaping me. What they say it's akin or similar to Kawasaki syndrome. But let's say at this point that is on the rise, and rather than going to the intubations, they say, well, you know what? We need to prepare for adults and children, and that might consider something else, and that might be our next increment. And the third increment might be the intubations and the ventilators, because at that point maybe the decision might come about that we're not going to co-locate COVID and non-COVID patients at this facility. Okay, so being adaptive to change, right? Nobody thought day one about this impact to children. So nobody was thinking of the Javits Center as being a facility for adult and children patients. But at this point, a month down the road, it comes up and it becomes a reality. So we can act fast and say, well, our next increment is going to consider that. Okay. Thank you. Yes, multi-system inflammatory syndrome. Thank you. Okay, so if you understand that example, that tells you a little bit about the purposefulness of Agile. If we were doing waterfall, we would be locked into our original plan. We would be locked into, because maybe purchasing will have already started. Some work has already started. This, remember, dependencies and predecessors, that there would be a lot of work done in advance to prepare for the second increment being what it was thought to be early on. In Agile, we don't do that. We don't do that. So here's a slide that I borrow from my other class, and it's very telling. If you talk about risk, whenever we talk about risk, we're talking about uncertainty. And risk is always high at the beginning of a project and decreases over the project lifecycle. That's just a truth. Why is that true? Because in the beginning, you don't know what can go wrong. You don't know what you don't know. And as you start working, you learn things. You experience things. Things become more certain, more and more certain as time goes on. So uncertainty decreases. The cost of changes, however, increases, because as you're learning, you're also completing project work, and to make a change may involve undoing, scrap, and redoing things that have already been done. So Agile works to reduce risk and resolve ambiguity. Reduce risk in terms of not committing to this whole project lifecycle up front, just dealing with what is known at a certain point. And resolving ambiguity, so it doesn't matter all these things that we don't know about the future, because they may not happen. The project might go in a different direction. So we deal with what is known now. And since we're working in smaller chunks, it reduces the cost of changes. It provides, so in order to reduce the cost of changes, Agile approaches need to provide maximum visibility and cycles of feedback, meaning transparency. Okay. Without transparency, those costs of changes will go up just as they would in a traditional project. But with the visibility, with feedback, with ongoing opportunities for inspection and adaptation, right, you can reduce the cost of changes because everybody's involved. And the thought of making a change does not happen at the end. It happens in real time because your stakeholders are engaged. So when would you use Agile? This is a good summary. When the scope is not clearly defined. Right? You need, Sarah's example, you need a website, right? But you don't know exactly what that website is going to entail. It's ambiguous or evolving. Right? You know you need a website, yes, but the full scope of that website is not clearly defined. Market conditions are uncertain, unsettling, or evolving. Right? You don't know what the market is going to bring, and it's impossible to predict. Technology platforms are rapidly changing. Right? If you're doing a application that will sit on, you know, piece of technology that's rapidly changing, how do you build for the upcoming release? How do you know what's going to be there, right? So you have to build things in smaller pieces so that they can be upgraded more easily. You would use Agile when change is not only anticipated, but it's embraced and encouraged. You want to change, right? Oftentimes in traditional project management, it's the path of least resistance not to change. Well, this is, right, I'll quote, this is what we said we were going to do. Why would we change that now? Right? That's not the Agile approach. You signed off on that. That's not the Agile approach. The requirements say we are going to build it this way. That's not the Agile approach. The Agile approach is, well, we have an idea of what we want, and we're going to encourage change if change is meaningful and provides value. We're not going to hold tight to what was approved. We're not going to hold tight to what was discussed 6 months ago. We're not going to hold tight, right, to something that was just documented to be some way. We're going to do what makes sense now. And that's not easy to do without the framework. Okay? The framework makes it possible to work in that situation, or else change being embraced and encouraged can be chaos. So the framework prevents change from being chaotic. It puts a structure, and so that's what Scrum specifically does, is put a structure so it's not chaotic. Right? What's not chaotic is change with some degree of rules. Okay? A firm deadline to deliver something. Okay? If, let's say you're in retail, right? And your hot season is Christmas, right? Holiday season, right? So you have to, Black Friday after Thanksgiving, you have to have your retail business geared towards probably, certain lines are going to sell, 60, 70% of their annual revenue comes within those couple of months, those couple of weeks. And you're in a manufacturing for toys or for Christmas ornaments or something to do with the holiday season, right? And you might have a lot of requirements for what's going to go into this new toy or this new gadget, right? And it might be the greatest thing ever, but if it misses the deadline, if it misses that Christmas rush, it's useless, right? So you have to be able to structure your development, your product development, based on value. What are the most important components of what we're building, such that we can deliver something in time for when it is useful. So we say that incremental results have usable value. If you deliver the usable value, you can always build onto it in another iteration. Or if you reach the end and your market dictates, well, this is our our season, our holiday season, you could stop building upon it and you still have a viable product that has the highest prioritized features. Okay? So it's a way of delivering something that may not be everything and still provides a useful value. Success depends upon customer satisfaction. It should even be ongoing success, because by delivering incremental results, you can listen to your customer and tune your product's next feature directly upon what the customer is telling you they want. Okay, rather than trying to second guess your customer. So I think it was back in 2002, which is about 18 years ago. Several geniuses in the technology world met in the Rocky Mountains, I think, in some resort in Colorado, and they said we're gonna put together what we call the Agile Manifesto. Right? They're gonna emerge from this retreat with that approach that's going to signify what Agile really means. And in short, what they came up with was 4 cornerstones. One being individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Right? The individuals, the people, and the interactions between those people. Leadership, teamwork, collaboration is going to be valued over following processes and what specific tool is to be used. Okay. Rather than letting the process define the interactions, allow the interactions to utilize the proper processes and proper tools. And if processes are broken through the interactions in the individuals, revise them. Processes are only as good as the time they were written, because they might have been successful once, but they may need to be revised over time. Number 2 is a working solution over documentation. Working solution means the technology itself. So often in technology projects, more time is spent documenting what will be, what we need, how we should look, at the expense of putting a working solution together. And documentation on paper might not even be feasible to put together as a working solution. It might be contradictory because the logic, right? Documentation on paper doesn't allow for feasibility, right? So you need a working solution that's going to be more tangible, a tangible result. That's not to say that documentation isn't important. Yeah, you have to put some documentation together so you know what the working solution is going to involve, and especially if you have, cross-functional team working, everybody stays on the same page and everybody works to the same specifications, right? But don't value the documentation over the working solution. Value the working solution over the documentation. The documentation can change if the working solution dictates, just like the processes can change if the individuals and the interactions dictate. Number 3 is customer collaboration over negotiations. Right? Negotiation has an us versus them attitude, and collaboration has a we and us approach. So wherever possible, even when you're working with third-party vendors, even when you're working with different organizations that may have prior histories, value collaboration, a team approach over us versus them, negotiation, and trying to come out better than somebody else. And 4, probably most importantly of these 4 cornerstones, is responding to change over following the plan. I think we talked a little bit about that leading up to this. Being able to respond to change is more important than following the plan. It doesn't mean that a plan does not exist. But just the same way the documentation is only as good as the paper it's written on, the plan is only as good as your ability to respond to reality. And that means responding to changes. Rather than read this to you, I'm going to give you a few minutes, 7:30. I'm going to take a short break. I want you to read this, come up with any types of questions you might have. And it's 7:30 right now. I say we'll be back at 7:45. Oh, that's gonna. I'll remove it. Read up to. Read up towards 11. Oh, that's the wrong one. Read up towards 11, and we'll go over 12 when we get back. Okay. So about 15 minutes or so. Okay, so I'm back. Just wait another 2 or 3 minutes to make sure everybody gets back from their break. But in the interim, if anybody read through 12 points and has any questions on it, you can start asking me, and we can go over that before we move on. Okay, so I don't see any questions. I guess it's pretty apparent what these things are. We will go through them. Spend a minute or two on them as a whole. But before we do that, just wanted to check back to the attendance. Okay, Jeanette, I see Jeanette is present, but I don't see you verified Google Drive access or YouTube. Is that an oversight, or if you're experiencing any problems? Other than that, everybody seems to be here, in attendance for tonight, which is great. Okay. On the attendance sheet, right? So I know from doing this last class, on the attendance sheet, you know what? Let me share. Let me share with you. So just take a minute again. Right. So we got the attendance sheet up there. We got all our names and information. But if we go down to the bottom, there are two tabs. The first tab is attendance, where you would mark yourself present for each class that you attend. Right? The second tab is YouTube links. If you click YouTube links, it's going to have the link for each of our 3 classes. Okay? So next week, May 28th, there's the link. It's already set up in advance. Right? And for June 4th, we have a link here as well. Okay? So if you get confused and you're not sure where to find the class, it's on the attendance sheet on the second tab. So I just wanted to bring your attention over to that. Okay. Terrific. So I'm just going again back to the attendance sheet one last time. Is everybody is present? Everybody except for Jeanette has indicated that they verified. Jeanette, if there's any problem at all, please email me, or you can come on to the comments and just let me know if there's any problem either accessing the Google Drive where the attendance sheet is, the Scrum Guide, this slide deck, etc., or this YouTube channel where the class is being held. Let me know. Other than that, we can move on now. Make it bigger for you. So when we talk about Agile Manifesto, we talk about the 4 cornerstones that we covered on the previous page, right? And the 12 points, right? Satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery, right? Engage that customer. Early delivery. They're going to get something. They're not going to wait 6 months. They're not going to wait 8 months, hoping that what they asked for is A, still relevant, and B, what you end up delivering, right? They're going to be engaged early and continuously through the process, receiving value in incremental stages. Welcoming change requirements at any stage of development. Okay, so you will never hear somebody, or you shouldn't, right? You may hear a lot of things, but you shouldn't hear coming from an Agile team, oh, we can't do that, at this point, right? You should have told us to do this earlier. We can't do that now. No, welcoming change. There's always a way to get around. Now, it might be costly, some, right? We say that we're trying to keep the cost minimized, but there's no avoiding the fact that changing requirements might slow down the process. But if they're for the right direction, for the right value, it works into the framework. Delivering working solutions frequently, right? That ties right back into number 1. Business and technical team collaborate, right? Collaborate, not negotiate. Okay, collaborate, teamwork. Support motivated individuals and trust them. So we have a level of trust in our team to get the job done. Okay. Face-to-face conversation is most effective. So you're saying, oh, wow, how's this going to work now when everybody's working from home? Well, it just says the face-to-face conversation is most effective. Was it? It is. There's a certain energy of presence that makes face-to-face conversation more effective, right? You can read more into body language. You can read more into exacerbation. You can read more into agreement. You can read more into passion when you're in the same room with somebody, as opposed to, being separated on either on a phone or on a technology-driven platform. Working solutions are the primary measure of progress. Working solutions. Working solutions are your results, your deliverables. Agile process promotes constant, sustainable pace of work. What is sustainable on a continuing basis, right? We know that certain things are not sustainable. Right? It's not sustainable to make no mistakes. Right? You know that humans are going to make a certain amount of mistakes that need to be corrected. Right? That has to be acknowledged in the process. Right? How many hours of work are you people doing? I mean, it's not sustainable to work 14 hours a day, ongoing forever. 7 days a week. It's not sustainable. People will burn out. The quality of the work will go down. Right? So we need to consider that and work at a pace that is constant and sustainable throughout the project. Continuous attention to technical excellence and best practices. Well, that goes back to the collaboration. Because now if you have collaboration and attention to technical excellence and best practices, the team is going to find a way to acknowledge those successes, acknowledge the individuals and the team as a whole for those successes, and ensure that they are adopted as best practices ongoing. Okay? And that gets back to motivated individuals, right? If teams are not motivated, you're going to lose more than you gain. You're going to lose anything good because people don't care. But if individuals are treated with respect, their work environment is understood so it's sustainable, and that it's understood that you want to work at a level of excellence, then the team will be motivated to continue to move. Simplicity is essential. Simplicity, maximizing the amount of work that's not done. Okay? Very important that you recognize the work that does not need to be done. What is busy work, right? What is work because it's always been done that way? How could we simplify? How could we make things more efficient? The best results emerge from self-organizing teams. Why? Because self-organizing teams motivate individuals. It ties right back up to 5. How do we motivate? Well, we allow them some self-organization, some self-management, some self-direction. And those teams will respond by becoming motivated to uphold their end of the bargain. And at regular intervals, the team must reflect on how to improve. So it goes back to number 9, continuous attention to technical excellence. Well, how do we bake that into the process? Is by putting at regular intervals an event where the team must reflect on how to improve. It's the responsibility of the team at regular intervals to look for self-improvement. Okay, and that's our Agile Manifesto, 12 points that form the foundation for what we're going to apply into the Scrum framework. Well, we have the Scrum framework is based on empirical process control theory. Knowledge comes from experience, and decisions are based on that knowledge. Very, very factual. And this ties right back to our manifesto, is to monitor progress and direct change. Okay? Be an agent of change rather than trying to inhibit change and predict process, right? We see what prediction can do, right? We do forecasting, we do predictions, we try to foretell the future. And while it could be useful to see what we may need to do to correct a trend, right? It's more important to monitor the progress along the way. And rather than trying to inhibit change, direct the change, right? Change is inevitable. Rather than trying to prohibit it, rather than trying to stop it. Make it part of the process so you can direct it and put a framework together that'll take us away from change being chaos and make change being structured. And the reason why this is valuable, knowledge comes from experience and decisions are based on that knowledge, allows us to make decisions at the last responsible moment when the most possible information is available. Right? If we make an early decision on something, we may not have all the information available, and we're locked into a decision for decision's sake. But if we wait too long, it's not being responsible, right? So saying the last responsible moment means, well, we're waiting until we have enough data, yet being cognizant about the time constraints on when work has to take place. So we wait until the last responsible moment, respecting the need of time to the people doing the work, and also respecting the knowledge that's going to come from our analysis. And throughout the Scrum process, you're going to be looking for transparency, inspection, and adaptation. See that right there? Those three, 1, 2, and 3, transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Those are the 3 pillars of empirical process control. That is definitely going to be one of your questions on your certification test. Right there, they might ask it in many ways. They may have a listing of 4 sets of 3 words where the choice is where transparency, inspection, and adaptation is the answer. Or they may say, well, here's a list of 5 or 6 entries. Select the 3 that represent the 3 pillars of empirical process control. Okay, so transparency, we talked about that. Inspection. If something is transparent, it allows for inspection. It's not good enough just to have things visible. They have to be visible and warrant inspection, comparison, evaluation. Right? And upon inspection, what do? Well, then it's the need for adaptation. Adaptation is after something is inspected, whether it's an approach or a deliverable, the output of an inspection is, well, maybe we need to do something else. Maybe it's missing something, or maybe something else would be nice, or maybe something else would be of value, or maybe we should be thinking of something else. Through the inspection, you formulate questions that may result in an adaptation. And that transparency breeds the inspection and the adaptation. Very important. So this particular slide gives us kind of a bird's eye view of the Scrum framework. This is what puts structure, right, into what could be chaotic change. So let's look. Product backlog are your requirements. So you're building something, you're creating something, the project has a deliverable as a final result. The product backlog is an inventory of all of the features, specifications, and requirements that are needed, or at least not even needed, I shouldn't even say that, that are thought of by your stakeholders, your project team, your customer, for inclusion. Some of them may be higher priority than others. Some of them may be critical. Some of them may be can't live without it. Some of them might be very cosmetic and incidental. Right? But they all go into the product backlog. During sprint planning, right? We'll talk about what a sprint is in a moment. But during sprint planning, we say, well, what are we going to do next? Or if it's the first sprint, what are we going to do first? And we select as a team from the product backlog that which can be completed in one increment. Okay? When we talk about an increment, we want to talk about 1 month or less, right? Because to be agile, you can't plan too far into the future. So typically a sprint is the time frame of your increment. And that sprint should be anywhere from 1 week to 1 month. Okay? So during sprint planning, we know what the length of our sprint is going to be, and we work with the team to select what are we going to do in our first 2 weeks. Let's say we have 2-week sprints. So for our first sprint, what is it we're going to do? And we take those requirements, those specifications, those product backlog items, and we pull them from the product backlog into something called a sprint backlog. Sprint backlog says, this is what we're going to do short term. Product backlog, this is what we're going to do, potential for doing forever, right? Sprint backlog, what are we going to do within the next, in my example, the next 2 weeks? Okay. They go into the sprint day by day. Work gets done. Every day, a daily Scrum meeting takes place to measure progress, to take corrective action, to bring the team together, to discuss any type of impediments or issues, solutions. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we have a sprint review. What does that mean? Well, the sprint is done. We look at all the specifications and requirements that were identified in the sprint backlog. We demonstrate them. We inspect them. The customer inspects them. The project sponsor inspects them. The stakeholders inspect them. The team inspects them, cross-referencing. And following sprint review, the increment is complete. And that increment can be published. It can be released. It can be launched to the market for usability. Okay? And then you start from all over again. You look in your product backlog and you say, okay, what's going to be sprint 2? And you go through the same process, planning to select what goes into your sprint, do the work, meeting daily with the team until the 2 weeks is complete. You do your sprint review and you build your increment. You have the next increment that combines with prior work, and it builds and it accumulates. And you could have 10 sprints, 12 sprints, 15 sprints, however many the decision is made that the backlog items are still providing value to your increment, to your product. And that's the framework. Now, after sprint review, after the increment comes out, you see there's 2 lines going back to something called the sprint retrospective. Okay? Because they both come back. The sprint review and the increment come back to something called the sprint retrospective. The sprint retrospective is where the team, right, not the stakeholders, not the customer, not the bosses, not the managers, but the team reflects on the work that was performed during the sprint. Okay? The team reflects on that and decides what they could do to improve. Okay? It's done after every sprint. So if you're doing 2-week sprints, every 2 weeks, the team is going to get together following that sprint for a retrospective to determine, okay, what did we do well that we want to make sure we repeat? What did we do not so well that we can improve, and how can we improve it? Were there any difficulties in interactions, in relationships? Okay. Was there any difficulty? Were we estimating the size of the work appropriately? Did we complete everything that was identified in the backlog? Right? Are we too aggressive or not aggressive enough in our sprint planning? That's what we look back upon and discuss to improve. Are there any tools that we might want to consider using? Is there a tool that one person on the team used that could be beneficial to the rest of the team? So retrospective is our ability to adapt, adaptation to improve performance, improve quality, improve working conditions, improve environment, etc. Okay. Good question, Amber. Could always count on you for a good question. Amber, what happens if a sprint takes longer than anticipated? We'll learn that a sprint does not take longer than anticipated. A sprint, right? A sprint is time boxed. So if we say the sprint is going to take 2 weeks, the sprint takes 2 weeks. We may not complete everything that we plan to complete within the 2 weeks. So that would mean that maybe some work would have to get postponed. But at the end of the 2 weeks, we're done with that increment. And then we would begin our next increment. So that would be a case for your retrospective to say, well, what went wrong? Were we not working efficiently, or did we bite off more than we could chew? Or was there extenuating circumstances that somebody got sick and we lost time, et cetera, so on and so forth, right? Was there extenuating circumstances? But the sprint does not take longer than anticipated. We're gonna hit that in a few minutes, very specifically. I'm going to leave this slide up there for a minute and really not say too much about it, because this is like one of these motherhood and apple pie things that you might be asked on a test about what the Scrum values might include: courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness, right? Those should be the ways of any project team. That should be the ways of any organization. Okay, that's, but since we're talking about Scrum, and since your certification exam will be based on Scrum and Scrum framework, those are the Scrum values. Will I ask you to memorize them? Probably. It's probably going to be a question on your test that links back to what these values might be. Now you all know that this whole slide deck is on the Google Drive as well. So you have, a lot of times students like to keep it on their laptop. Sometimes they like to print it out and write their own notes on it. It's yours. It's yours. Whatever we're seeing up here, you've got a copy. Download it, and you can do as you wish. So here we go. We're going to talk about the core elements of Scrum. Right? We talked about the framework, right, which really went through this middle column of events. But let's talk about the roles and the artifacts that go along with the structure of the events. Okay? We have the roles are known as the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum Master. Okay? The product owner owns the requirements. The product owner, you could think of as almost a surrogate for the stakeholder, the customer. The development team is a team that's doing the work. Right? If it's a technology team, if it's a software team, if it's a manufacturing team, the team that's doing the work. And the Scrum Master, we'll talk about their specific role, is that of an influencer, right? And the person that's going to make sure that the job gets done efficiently without obstacles. Okay? And then we'll talk about the events and the artifacts. We already kind of ran through the events on the framework, and the artifacts is a product backlog, which we talked about, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. Okay? So let's hit them one by one. So the roles, the product owner. The product owner maximizes the value of the product. So if we're talking about the product backlog, right, we're talking about the requirements that are going to define the value of the product. The product owner is going to be the person that's most in tune with them and have the understanding of what value those requirements and those specifications bring to the marketability and the overall product. Okay? The product owner is going to optimize the value of the work performed, meaning ensure that the work that's being performed is done towards the right deliverables. Ensure that the priority of the specifications, the requirements, and the features are in tune with the value of the product, so that the development team is assigned to do the right work at the right time. Okay? Therefore, the product owner is going to manage the product backlog. Remember, we had that product backlog as a repository of all of the requirements, specification, and features. The product owner owns that. The product owner is going to ensure that it's clear. It's going to ensure that it reflects the value of the product, that it is translatable by the development team, right? And represents the values of the stakeholders. So the product owner will facilitate stakeholder engagement. Okay? Bring in those outside voices into the key team. The Scrum Master is going to ensure that the team adheres to Scrum processes. The Scrum Master is going to ensure that the framework is kept to maintain a change-driven environment, adhering to those values, right? Adhering to the pillars, right, of Scrum, adhering to the Agile Manifesto, adhering to the respect, right, and the motivation of the team, and not de-evolving into chaos because everybody wants everything now and beyond the team's capability. Scrum Master controls that through the framework. The Scrum Master will enhance the team's productivity. Understanding the work that's going on and ensuring that they're doing the right work, the right time, that they're utilizing each other's collaboration, maybe run interference for the development team, resolve issues, escalate, and facilitate in planning of the Agile environment to ensure that the organization as a whole understands the Agile environment and the environment that is going to lead to the productivity of the team. Okay. We call the Scrum Master the servant leader of the Scrum team. Servant leader means as a leader of the team, the Scrum Master is also the servant, realizing that the work that's being done is being done by others. And that the team will be successful if the team is successful. And the team will be successful if they can work productively. And they can work productively if they have a servant leader that can clear their path for them so that they are not distracted. If the development team can keep heads down and not be distracted unnecessarily, or have issues that are raised, escalated, and solutions being provided to them while they are still efficient, they're still active working on their tasks, the Scrum Master can take care of that. Like I said, run interference, escalate, and resolve issues so that the development team can get their work done. The development team is self-organizing. Remember, we talked earlier about the ability of the team to be self-organizing will lead to motivation. That means the work is going to be assigned to the team. The product owner is going to say, well, these are the items in the backlog that I see as the highest value that we want to do in this next sprint. The development team will work out who among the team does what. So the team is cross-functional, so that they can decide who best to do what within their team. Small team, 3 to 9 individuals. You don't want to have an extremely large team who is then loses focus. If you have more than 9 individuals, then you have to set up multiple teams, and we'll talk about that in our third class when how to scale Scrum to larger projects. For right now, let's keep it within the framework of 3 to 9 on the development team, plus 1 Scrum Master and 1 product owner. Okay, that's your standard roles. No titles, no sub-teams, no exceptions. Okay, what does that mean? It means that everybody might have titles from their job descriptions. They might have titles within the organization. They may be senior, junior. They may be managers. They may be analysts. It could be anything, right? But as long as you're on the Scrum team, those titles become meaningless for the purposes of Scrum. You're all development team members. There's no rank. Okay? The team can, therefore the team can collaborate. Okay? The team can collaborate. And they're empowered to self-manage their work. So, empowered to self-manage their work, they get the credit fully when they achieve. They've got to stand up for themselves when they don't and figure out what's going on and improve when improvement is needed. Okay. Scrum Master will work as a coach with the development team, but does not necessarily dictate what the development team does. Okay. Right? The Scrum Master enhances the team's productivity. So if they're empowered to self-manage their work and they're running into trouble learning how to self-manage, the Scrum Master will step in and coach them, but not dictate. It's not the directorial role. So looking at those roles in terms of what we call a project manager, in Scrum, there is no role in Scrum named project manager. We don't have somebody called, we have a Scrum Master, we have a product owner, we have a development team. Nobody is named to be project manager. So how do we address that within the project? Well, by bringing the stakeholders in, the product owner is taking on a project management role of bringing stakeholders in, getting their guidance, getting their input, resolving the stakeholder issues, because It's related to the product scope, the features. The methodology is the realm of the Scrum Master. So we can think of that as project scope, doing the work and how to accomplish the work during this time together. And the development team, being self-organizing, is also responsible for project management, traditional project management role. So you could think of the project management role being divided up between the three Scrum roles to a certain extent. And some teams will have a heavier presence of a Scrum Master than others. Some will have maybe some expertise in the development team that shines as that project management role, and the Scrum Master doesn't have to extend themselves as deeply. But if you look at the stakeholders, the methodology, and the self-organizing aspect of the development team, the role of project management is not named as a project manager, but it's shared by those three roles. Okay. I don't see any questions yet. I don't see any questions yet. I hope everybody's okay. Did I lose anybody? Let's just pause for a minute before we go into the events. Oh, I'm sorry. I do see a question. I'm sorry, Miriam. Is the daily Scrum meeting always daily or just for this example? No, it is a daily meeting. We're going to get to that in a minute or two when we talk about our Scrum events. The daily Scrum meeting is a formal event. Okay, so we talked a little bit about our events. The overall sprint, right? The overall sprint says, how often can we produce something? And it answers that question. How often can we produce something? If we're saying, can we produce something every 2 weeks? And you say, well, no, we need a little bit longer, we might need 3. So you have 3-week sprints. So you could have monthly sprints. Right? Something called a cadence. A cadence. Those of you who study music, who know what a cadence is. Cadence in terms of Scrum means that you want your sprints to be largely the same length on an ongoing basis. You don't want to have the first sprint being a week, and then the second sprint being a month, and then the third sprint going back to 2 weeks, and then the fourth sprint going to 3 weeks, and then going back to a month again, and then doing a weekly sprint for 3 weeks, and then another month. Now, you want to establish something that's predictable within the framework, right? So that's what we say. We want to invite change. We want to make it open, but by having a structure or a framework that change can reside within, we can make change manageable. So one way that we make it manageable is by establishing a cadence. So our sprints will start off at 2-week sprints. For the foreseeable future, we're going to do 2-week sprints. Now, do we change that? Well, yeah, of course. If there's a need to change, if our experience tells us that 2 weeks isn't enough or 2 weeks is too long, we want to go to weekly sprints. We make the decision as a Scrum team to say, can we achieve a better result by going either into a 1-week sprint or a 3-week sprint or a monthly sprint, and say, well, if we make that decision, we want to continue it as our new cadence. Okay, so it's a serious thought to change the sprint, but it can be done, right? You're changing the framework. You can say what works. So, for example, you start off with a 2-week sprint for the foreseeable future. You assume that you're going to work in 2-week sprints until it doesn't work for you anymore. Sprint planning says, okay, we have our set time factor in terms of our sprint. We say, what is our immediate goal? What do we want to accomplish in that 2 weeks? And so the planning says, not only what are we going to accomplish in those 2 weeks, but how are we going to accomplish it too, right? So the product owner will own the what we want to accomplish, and the development team is going to have to figure out how we're going to do it and if it's feasible. And that sprint planning meeting would have to be a collaborative effort so that it's understood what do we want as our immediate goal and how are we going to do it. The daily scrum says, will we meet our immediate goals? So now that we know how often we're going to produce something and what our immediate goal is, every day we meet to ensure that we're on track to meeting that goal. And if we're not, what can we do, right, before it's too late? How can we take corrective action? That's why it's important that the meeting is daily. The meeting shouldn't, because if you say, well, we don't need to have it today, then we might not need to have it tomorrow. And then, we're talking about a 2-week sprint. You miss a couple of days, you lose the opportunity to take corrective action because maybe you're assuming things are going well. Okay, so no, you have the daily scrum every day, and it's only 15 minutes. The idea of a daily scrum is 15-minute, what we call a stand-up meeting. Stand-up meeting, nobody sits down, no chairs, right? Very quickly, what did you complete? What is your plan for today? And what problems or impediments do you have that need to be resolved, right? Go. Okay, so now we could see if we're on track. We could see if corrective action needs to take place. We could see if there are any issues that are holding up the work and responsible for not meeting the immediate goal, and escalating those and taking corrective action. And those go on daily as long as the sprint is defined for. So if it's 2 weeks, every day for 2 weeks. If it's a month, every day for 30 days. Until the end, we get to a sprint review. Sprint review, we say, what did we achieve? So to answer Amber's question, I think it was Amber who asked, well, what if it takes longer? Well, it doesn't take long. The sprint review is the last day of your sprint. It's the last day of your 2-week sprint. Demonstrate, show and tell, right? You bring the sponsor, bring the stakeholders in, team, and review what was achieved. Now, it might not have been everything that was planned for. Hopefully, during your daily scrums, you know that and you communicate that, so there's no expectation that it's going to be, the full set of what was planned for if that's not what's being demonstrated, right? Again, the project management components of monitoring, controlling, communication, and risk management, they don't go away because you're doing Scrum, right? In fact, with the accelerated time frame, they might even become more important. Okay, but we don't teach them in this class, right? We assume that they have an idea of what that means. So in the sprint review, we say, what did we achieve? And at that point, at the sprint review, what did we achieve? And is it useful to release? Does it have value to the customer? Should it be put into the marketplace? Or should it be held back until maybe the following sprint, because you say, well, it doesn't provide that much of value and it would only be disruptive. Let's wait until our next increment and then release them together, right? So that's a decision that's made within the sprint review. And the sprint retrospective says, how do we improve? Right? The team gets together and says, take stock on what went through for the other 4 events and ask the question, how do we improve? So we probably covered a lot of that in the description, but prescribed events are used to create consistency. Right? Creating consistency adds to the capability of managing change. Right? If there was inconsistency and change, you'd have chaos. Consistency reduces complexity. Right? Even if something is as simple as holding your daily scrum at the same time every day, right? It reduces complexity. It says, okay, if we're having our daily scrum from 8:45 to 9 a.m., 15 minutes, right? If the first couple of days, everybody's going to get into the routine of saying, okay, it's consistently at 8:45, this is where I'm supposed to be. Either live, or you might be dialing in, or it might be through a technology platform. But you'll know at this particular time every day, that's our time for our daily scrum. The event's a time box, so that's the term used to say we do not exceed a set duration. Okay? So the event's a time box. The sprint is time boxed, and all of the events are time boxed as well. So we don't want a planning meeting that's going to exceed, I believe it's 4 hours. Right? We don't want our daily scrum to exceed 15 minutes. We don't want a retrospective to exceed 3 hours. Now, could they take shorter than that? Of course. Right? But you don't want to exceed the duration, just as you don't exceed the duration of the sprint as a whole. Right? If the sprint is for 2 weeks, it's time box. You do not exceed the 2-week period. All I had to do was click and see. So a sprint is 1 month or less. Sprint planning, 8 hours, full day for a 1 month sprint, less for shorter sprints. That's the maximum, right? 8 hours is a long time to be doing sprint planning, but that's the maximum. And if you're doing 2-week sprints, proportionally less. If you're doing 1-week sprints, proportionally less. Daily scrums are 15 minutes. That's it. They shouldn't take more than 15 minutes, right? Scrum Master, if they are taking more than 15 minutes, the Scrum Master will have to coach the team into how we could be effective in 15 minutes. Sprint review is 4 hours for a 1 month sprint, less for shorter sprints. And the retrospective is 3 hours. Again, shorter sprints assume less work, less time needed for the events. Okay. And again, these are the maximums. You could be less, right? So 8 hours for sprint planning. You don't hang around for 8 hours if it could be done in 2. Okay, before we go on to artifacts, just wanted to stop and see if there were any questions, comments, feedback. You can type it. Does anybody want to enter? I'll bring that link up again. If anybody wants to Okay, so if anybody wants to enter the classroom, be seen and heard. And if more than one person wants to come in, I could handle, like, I think it can handle 6 at a time. But I would have you in the backstage and just bring one person on at a time to converse, or else it just gets to be one person talking over the next. But I'll leave that up there if anybody wants to enter the room. If anybody has a question on what we've done so far, either through chat or through entering the classroom, I'll just give you another minute or two to decide whether you want to do that or not. So tonight is just going to be teaching. Tonight is just going to be this. We're going to go through probably another 20 to 30 minutes worth of material, and that'll be it for tonight. So if you do have questions, we do have plenty of time. It's not going to, we're going to probably break around 9 o'clock or so. Next week, we're going to go through the life cycle. What I want to do is, as we go through the life cycle, actually, maybe use some software, maybe use some example, that we can have a living example as we go through the process. See how that works. I've done it in the live class. I don't know how it will be on an online live streaming class. It might be more difficult. It might be easier because everybody's sitting at the computer anyway. We'll see. And if I know it was tough when we did it in the project management class. I brought up that rational plan, and it was tough, to do it in this manner, to teach, to present software, and to get everybody engaged at the same time. It was a little tough, but we'll give it a try. If it doesn't work, we'll stop it quickly, or we'll adapt. This is an agile class. So I don't see any questions. I'm going to continue on. If you do have questions, want to enter the classroom or chat, either way, go ahead and do it. I'll just either hold the question aside, or invite you into the classroom at the appropriate time. But as far as you're concerned, you can just do it. So our artifacts, we talked about what the product backlog is. So product backlog is the single source of product requirement and changes, right? So the product backlog lives and breathes. It's added to throughout the project life cycle, right? It's not just filled up front with all of the thoughts and desires of the stakeholders, and then stops. No, any changes, it's always in a continuing state of things get added, things get changed, things get clarified. Sometimes requirements break apart into multi requirements because they get decomposed, right? Because they're too big to do all at once, so you have to break them up into pieces, and again, by value. It evolves to identify what the product needs to be: appropriate, competitive, and useful. Okay, it involves everything that the product needs to be. So all the requirements, all the features, and if that involves change. It's prioritized by value as determined by the product owner. Okay, the product owner determines the value of the backlog items. Development team does not determine the value. Scrum Master does not determine the value. The product owner, remember, the product owner was responsible for facilitating the stakeholders, and it will be up to the product owner to prioritize the value. Okay? It's a living artifact. It's never complete. It's always ongoing. So from the product backlog, during sprint planning, we have what we call a sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is basically a subset of the product backlog that's selected to be done in the upcoming sprint, right? So the product backlog items are selected and a plan for delivering the product increment and realizing the goal of the sprint. So part of your sprint planning is not only that you're going to be bringing in haphazard backlog items. Oh, we're going to do this one, that one, from a selection of individual requirements. It's going to have some sort of an overarching goal. What do you want to accomplish in your increment? What do you want to accomplish by achieving and by completing these backlog items? So there'll be a goal that says, okay, when we complete this increment, it will address a certain market segment, or it will address a feature that will make us more competitive in a specific customer type. Okay, so it'll have an overarching goal, and it will be comprised of the sprint backlog items that need to be completed in order to deliver that goal. The development team will work to update the sprint backlog as the work is completed, real time, right? So you can picture the sprint backlog as, just picture it as a spreadsheet or another type of database. And as the development team completes or works on an item, they'll provide real-time update, right? Whether or not they completed it, maybe a percentage if it's incomplete. I'm halfway done with it. Maybe indicating if there's any questions or clarifications that are needed in order to complete it, right? Maybe if they're waiting for somebody outside of the team, maybe they're waiting for somebody at a vendor to do something in order to complete their work, they would note that. And everything is visible. Remember, transparency, so that the whole team can get a picture of where the status is of the sprint at any point in time during that sprint. There'll be a real-time picture of the work completed and the work that's remaining. Okay? So why is that important? Let me throw that back. So question and answer. Nobody's joining me in the classroom on the chat. Why is that important? It says it's a visible, real-time picture of the work completed and the work remaining. If a sprint is only 2 weeks, why is that important that we have that real-time picture of what's completed and what's remaining? Okay. Yes, I see a couple. I'm just going to give everybody a chance to submit their thoughts. To keep track of progress, right? We're doing these daily Scrum meetings, right? We want to know what's been done and what's remaining every day to take corrective action. So to keep track of progress, we'll know when corrective action may be necessary and where that corrective action might be necessary to make sure everyone is on target to complete the sprint, right? So you have a development team that is self-organizing, right? But maybe somebody needs help and they're not forthcoming in asking for that help. Maybe that's where the Scrum Master needs to coach the team, right? To look for those indicators of where help might be needed to get something done before it becomes impossible to catch up from, or to understand what's not going to be completed for the future sprint. Exactly, right? We say we have a 2-week sprint, right? Let's say it's 2-week sprint. It's 10 working days. If you're on day 7 and you have 3 days left, and you have more than 3 days worth of work left, maybe it's time to meet with the development team, the product owner, and say, okay, it doesn't look like we're going to finish this work. Out of the work that we're doing, what should we ensure gets done, and what can possibly be um, pushed into a future sprint if needed? You always go in and you say, well, we'd like to finish everything, and if we can, we will. But given that we're in the 7th day of a 10-day sprint, we want to know, what value, what sprint backlog items have the value that's needed to ensure that we complete, right? And if any amendments are needed, right? Exactly, and knowing them earlier rather than later is always better, right? You don't want to wait until day 9, right? Or, right, remember what the question was. Why is it important to have a real-time picture of the real-time picture of the why is transparency so critical, right? Because if amendments are needed, if anything is needed, everybody knows. Everybody, or maybe it's only apparent to somebody with the expertise. Maybe somebody, maybe the Scrum Master. If only the Scrum Master had visibility, it might go undetected because the Scrum Master might not have the technical knowledge or the specific technical knowledge of one of the um, development team members or the product owner for that matter, right? So as long as it's visible, transparent, that whoever needs to see it can see it and can suggest or at least propose changes, amendments, etc. Monitor the work completed versus the work still in scope of the sprint. That's a very interesting point, Sarah. Exactly. Monitor the work completed versus the work still in scope of the sprint. What if you complete more? What if you're in your day 7, right? And you're almost done, and you're looking at it and saying, you know what, we might be done by the end of today. And we'll have 2 more days that we could do more work, right? Remember, the time box for the sprint says 2 weeks. So if you finish everything early, guess what? You get to pull more work out of the product backlog that, again, would make sense, that, again, is doable within the time frame, and that would add value to your sprint, right? You don't want to just say, we're done now, we take 2 days off, right? If changes are approved, did it take place immediately or have to wait for the next sprint? You can have a change within a sprint. You could have a change within a sprint if the changes are affecting the work that's taking place. Yeah, I mean, you want to avoid that, right? Because again, It's the structure and the framework that provides a sense of consistency as opposed to chaos. And if you have too many changes that would affect within the sprint, it gets chaotic. So you don't want to um, change things that are within the sprint. But if they have to, and that's what I would call the exception. We're going to go over that on our third class. Exceptions would be, what if you even have to cancel the sprint? What if the sprint that you're doing, the sprint goal becomes obsolete. The sprint goal becomes something that doesn't make sense anymore. You're only maybe 4 days into a 10-day sprint. Do you want to waste 6 days for something that's obsolete? No. So these types of things are exceptions, and it's the type of thing that you would want to um, do very infrequently. But yes, they do occur. Okay, so I think I got everybody's. If anybody else has either a follow-up question or a new question based on that, please do. I am going to go back to the slide for, I think we have one more slide left. Right, so the artifacts, the product backlog is a single source of requirements. Sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog that's going to be addressed within the next near-term deliverable. And the product increment is that near-term deliverable. It's the sum of all product backlog items completed in the sprint and the value of increments from the previous sprints. What does that mean? Well, on your first sprint, on your first increment, there is no previous, right? So the first increment is the first increment. After that, it's the new increment always gets accumulated into the value of all the prior sprints. So it becomes an accumulated deliverable. Okay. The increment must be done, meaning it must be in usable condition, right? So oftentimes I get the question, well, isn't this just like taking a phased approach in a traditional project? What's the difference between Agile and just doing a phased approach? Well, there are two answers to that, right? They're both true. Two answers to that. One is, in a phased approach, right? You're planning for those phases. You say you have 4 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and they're well defined. Where in Scrum, you have any number of sprints. You don't even know. You don't know if you're gonna have 10 sprints, 12 sprints, 9 sprints. You just know that you're gonna have 2-week sprint, and then we're gonna do something after that, and we're gonna keep doing sprints until we're no longer producing value. Okay, you may have deadlines that have to tie into the sprints, like our Christmas holiday deadline, or something to do with the medical, right? We're setting up the Javits Center. You're going to have deadlines that your sprints have to tie into, but you still might be doing sprints after that deadline, right? You might be still doing sprints after that Christmas rush comes and goes, right? So the project doesn't necessarily end. You have delivery points. So a phased approach is still predictive, where the Agile Scrum approach is not trying to predict, it's being responsive and adaptable in small increments. Okay? The other thing is that a phased approach may yield at the end of a phase an interim deliverable that's not releasable, that's not ready for customer use. Okay? You could have a phased approach where your first phase right, would be a system design. Right? Then you just have the design. It's on paper. The design phase. Yeah. Design phase gets approved, then you can go into, you know, an integration phase or whatever have you. Right? You might have a testing phase, and it's not until the end of all of those phases that you're delivering the product that the customer is actually seeing the result. With the Scrum Agile approach, at the end of every sprint, you have a potentially releasable output, deliverable. Okay, so at the end of your sprint review, that increment is going to be done, meaning it's been tested, meaning it's in usable condition, meaning that all you need to do is release it and provide it to the market, whatever that means with your specific organization. The product owner may or may not decide to release the increment, right? Again, it's up to the product owner. If the product owner says this is valuable stuff, we want to get it out there because it's going to maybe correct some problems that are out there, maybe address a market, maybe service a customer that is in need. Then the product owner would say, okay, great. This sprint increment will be releasable. But they could also look at it and say, well, maybe we'll hold on to it and let it accumulate into the next increment because we don't want to disrupt the market with too many releases, right? They're still getting used to the old one, and this will only be a source of confusion because there's new features in it. Maybe we'll hold it back until our next increment, and next month we'll release it to the market. But that's a product owner decision. It's not built that way. It's built that it could be released or it could be held back. And it's the product owner's decision at that time. And that product owner's decision might come right at that time in the review. Maybe the product owner was planning on releasing it, but something happened that, day 10 that said, I want to hold it back. Or vice versa, thinking that they might hold it back, see something in the demonstration and says, no, this will resolve a lot of questions that are out there now, and we should release it and make that. That's up to the product owner. And the team should be ready for that decision. And that's why we say the increment must be done, must be developed, must be tested, must be known, a known quantity, and ready for the real world. Okay, so that's all I have for you for tonight. I don't see any more questions. Next week, we're going to go into the Agile life cycle. We'll go through each step by step, and we'll try to relate that to a live example. And I'm going to work on a couple of things. Like I said, I've done this in an in-person class, and we did it one way. I'm not sure that it's going to translate well here, so I might get creative with it, and we'll try it. But in any sense, like I've been saying, the content is the same from our live in-person classes to our live streaming online class. The content is the same. The material is the same. You're going to learn the same thing. The delivery is what's a little different and what needs to be adaptable. So we'll see what works. We'll see what doesn't work. What if at the end of a sprint you do not have a done product, like trying to add a feature but cannot be completed? Right. So okay, so you reach the end. So it should not be a surprise, right? And there's your project management. There's the role of the Scrum Master in all of this. It's right. It's transparent. It's visible. It's not like, it's an exception if at the very end of your sprint review you realize that it's not done. was there something wrong, right? That would be an exception. That would be a surprise. 99 times out of 100, the team should know that they're not going to accomplish the finished product in time for their time box of the sprint. Right? They should know probably a couple of days earlier, at least. Right? So it shouldn't be a surprise. And that sense of not being a surprise should be transparent, communicated, etc. Right? So you don't end up with, you know, adversity at the sprint review. What the sprint review would say is, well, this is what we have, this is what works, this is how it works, and it's the product owner's decision. So at the end of the sprint review, if you don't have a done product, it should be known. You still have the sprint review. It should be known, though. Like trying to add a feature but could not be completed. So now you look at it and you say, well, on day 8, we started knowing that there might have been a problem with this feature. And, you know, maybe the person that was assigned to it on the development team was having some trouble. And as part of our daily scrum, we coach. We say, well, you know, you've been working on it. I'm just going to make up a name, Stanley. Stanley's been working on this, and he's been working diligently, and he's just having problems. Maybe there's somebody else in the organization that can help Stanley, right? There's an impediment. And what's the Scrum Master there for? To resolve issues, to identify something that can be more efficient. And maybe, like I said, back on day 7, day 8, it looks as though that there's a problem that might either not be completed or maybe needs help in order to be completed. And the discussions begin. Hey, who in the organization can we get to help Stanley out? Maybe he's doing this for the first time. He's trying hard, but he needs some expert advice. Maybe we have to go outside to a vendor, to a consultant to get some help on this. Maybe we talk to the product owner in advance and say, hey, Stanley's working hard. He may or may not be able to deliver this feature. Right? We're trying to get some help for him. Right? But there's a potential that that feature would not be ready. Be prepared, Mr. Product Owner, Mrs. Product Owner. Right? Be prepared to say, well, is it still potentially releasable without this particular feature? Because we have maybe several other features that are valuable. Or maybe the product owner says, no, without this feature, that's the linchpin. Those other features don't make sense. So going into the review, right, it should be visible and transparent, right, so that that decision can be made honestly. Are there surprises? Yeah, of course. Maybe, you know, maybe Stanley had it working. He was making good progress all along. But that last little thing that he was doing on that last day caused the problem. Or maybe something that looked good and was overlooked. And when the demo took place, something didn't work right. There was a bug. There was a problem. There was something that prevents it from being releasable. So yeah, it has to be a team decision. It has to be a team decision. But what we try to do is limit the surprise. We try to limit the surprise by facing reality head on. I hope that makes sense. Okay, any other questions, comments? I know there's a little bit of a lag again between what I say, what you hear, what you type, and what I read. But I'll let this. You're going to see like a moment of silence for about 30 seconds. Just want to make sure. I think I saw Jeanette sign in. Everybody signed in. Terrific. Everybody's verified. Terrific. So unless there's any other questions, next week, I'll send an email out, but next week you could just go into the attendance sheet, the second tab that has the links. You could either click on that or copy it into your browser, and the URL into your browser and join us for week number 2, May 28th. So until then, I'll just end the class. It was great catching up with everybody again. I'm going to say next week, don't be shy. If anybody was having trouble with the entering the classroom, let me know what device you were using. Because if you were on a laptop, it should work fine. I really can't help you out if you're trying to get into a phone. It says it works on all devices, right? StreamYard is what I use. They say it uses all devices, but I'm working off a laptop. So, and I know Nan was on a laptop when she entered. But you can just send me an email, tell me if you were trying to get in, if you were having trouble, or let me know. Say, you know what, I really don't want to enter the classroom. I'm good enough with the chat. That's communicate with me one way or the other. I'm trying to work through this too. This is new for all of us. So help me out. Just send it through the email, and next week we'll adapt and we'll improve, right? So we'll see how we can make this class better over the next 2 weeks. Okay, so I wish everybody a good night, and I'm going to end the class, and I'll see you all on next Thursday.